Great Depression left women scrambling, trying to keep their homes clean and their families fed on impossibly strict budgets, often in places covered with dirt from the Dust Bowl. They faced unimaginable struggles while somehow managing to keep their kids healthy and their homes spotless. Here's how they managed to make that happen. What if I told you that the most frugal people in North American history could teach us something about abundance? During the Great Depression, families had to make a single dollar stretch further than we make $100 stretch today. Their secret, it wasn't being cheap. It was about being strategic about every single resource. Now, I can be super frugal when it comes to some things. Like when I get to the bottom of my toothpaste, I am squeezing every last drop out of that. I will perform surgery. I will scrape things out of condiments, just like I am some kind of master physician. My former ER colleagues would be proud. But Depression-era families, they took this to an art form. They didn't have wiggle room. They would use soap slivers until they were paper thin, and then they would press them together to make new bars. They would darn socks until there was more darning thread than original sock left, and they would keep wearing them. They literally invented the original reduce, reuse, recycle before it was even trendy, because every single penny counted. Unemployment hit over 13 million people, and families went from comfortable middle-class lives to wondering where their next meal would come from. Let's get to their structured weekly cleaning routine, the heart of their system. What if I told you that women in the 1930s had a different work-life balance than most of us do today? Despite working twice as hard and having no modern appliances, they were rock stars at this. Without dishwashers, washing machines, or vacuum cleaners, every household task took hours instead of the minutes that I will complain about. Laundry alone was a full day affair that could break your back and spirit, but somehow they managed to keep them spotless without burning out. Their secret was an incredibly structured weekly schedule that prevented overwhelm by breaking massive tasks into manageable daily tasks. Each day it had a specific purpose, and by the end of the week, everything was done without anyone having a nervous breakdown. Most of the time. So let's get to Monday, wash day. So Monday was universally laundry day because it was backbreaking work and they just had to get a head start on that. And they called it Blue Monday. And not because they were New Order fans, but because women were literally blue from exhaustion by the end of it. So I want you to just imagine that you're up at 4:30 a.m. and you're building a fire in the stove because you have to heat your hot water. And it could take about 2 hours. I bet you thought your Monday mornings were rough because you ran out of coffee pots and you had to go to work. These women were planning their laundry days before most of us even think about our first cup of coffee. And the real challenge, it wasn't about the early start, which I think a lot of us can relate to. I certainly don't like that. But they had to collect rainwater from barrels or pump well from a water by hand. And I bet some of them even had to haul it from the river when things were really tough, because who knows where some of these people were living. And there's not turning a handle and getting instant hot water like we do here. They were basically running their own water treatment facility in the backyard. The reason they used rainwater was because it worked better with their homemade lye soap, which they made from saved kitchen grease and lye. Can you imagine making your own detergent from bacon grease? And it actually worked better than what we buy today. Also, can you picture seeing that soap at a craft fair? Because there's always people selling soap. Can you picture that? So the washing process itself was brutal. Every single item had to be scrubbed on a washboard. Those rigid metal surfaces, I think sometimes there was like other material it was made from, but it would tear up their knuckles. It was like doing laundry with a cheese grater. Then they had to go back to the boiling water to rinse their laundry in 3 separate tubs. And then there was the hand wringing, which could break your fingers if you were not careful with those old roller machines. I remember my grandpa had one of those in his basement when I was a kid growing up. They also would dry their laundry outside. Now, I do not have a line to dry anymore, so I actually still love to dry my clothes outside. I will use a clothing horse and I will hang things outside whenever I can, because there is something so satisfying about the smell of freshly dried stuff outside. It reminds me of my grandma. And just like these women, I also will do this in the winter. I just move my horse near the fireplace inside. There's something so meditative about hanging laundry once you get past the initial, this is taking forever. I can't, even like line drying, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine. At least I'm just like throwing it over the side of the horse. And yes, I know a lot of people, they still dry outside in the winter, but over here on the west coast of Canada, on Vancouver Island, it is so damp. Even when it's not raining, stuff would never dry. But you know what's brilliant about their line drying technique? They would hang the whites in direct sunlight for natural bleaching. Then the colored clothing would be in the shade to prevent fading. And they would always bring everything in before the dew would fall. They were basically running a solar-powered, eco-friendly laundry service before anybody even knew what eco-friendly was. We have lost something. Before I get to the rest of the weekly routine, we need to understand why these habits were so crucial. And to do that, we need to know just how devastating this period really was. Before I go on, I think I need a bit more context about what the Great Depression even was. So the name Great Depression, it seems almost too simple for what was actually economic and emotional devastation on a scale that we can barely imagine today. And yes, it was called depression because of a financial depression. The global economy literally collapsed between 1929 and 1939. Banks failed, people's businesses closed overnight, and families lost everything. And beyond financial depression, naturally, most people were emotionally depressed because they were trying to survive in near impossible conditions that I could only imagine. You've probably seen that iconic photo of the migrant mother, Florence Owens Thompson, with her children during the Dust Bowl. The desperation in her eyes tells the whole story. You can just feel it. She was a 32-year-old mother with 7 children, living in a tent, surviving on vegetables from the fields and birds that her children caught. Can you imagine trying to keep your family fed and your home clean under those conditions? And I have mentioned the Dust Bowl. It made everything worse. It struck the southwestern Great Plains, Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas, Colorado, and up until Alberta, Saskatchewan, probably parts of Manitoba. When drought combined with poor farming practices that actually destroyed the natural prairie grasses, which left the topsoil to blow away in devastating storms because plants and trees and everything hold the ground in place. So these storms buried homes, they killed crops, and they made simple cleaning an endless battle against nature itself. Do you remember in The Wizard of Oz how it looks so barren? Whether or not that was filmed on a soundstage, that's because people back then were literally fighting Mother Nature with a broom, and they were losing. Families would wake up to find dust covering every surface inside their home, despite their best efforts to seal windows and doors. Cleaning was like a battle. Also, in this environment, throwing anything away, it wasn't wasteful. It was potentially life-threatening because and I've said this a lot of the time on the channel, and I've talked to a lot of people, where because my grandma was born during the Depression and her mom was raising kids during the Depression, people, they did not want to get rid of anything because they understood that everything could hopefully have some kind of purpose, which unfortunately in this day and age has left a lot of us with too much stuff and too much clutter. Let's get back to Tuesday. So if Monday was physically exhausting, Tuesday was mentally exhausting. Do you know that feeling when you look at a mountain of laundry and you just wear it straight out of the dryer? Well, these women did not have that option. Everything, and I mean everything, had to be ironed because of the way it was washed and dried. Sheets, underwear, dish towels, work clothes. I want to walk you through what a typical Tuesday looked like because it shows you just how different their daily rhythm was from ours. So at 5 a.m. while we are hitting snooze for the 3rd time, they were already building fires and putting coffee on. Except for their coffee quite often was made from chicory or roasted grains because real coffee was a luxury item for them. And I really hope tea wasn't a luxury item for them. Who knows? Anyway, they would start heating their irons on the stove. All 6 to 8 of them. They'd put them on the stove. And I know this is another thing like my grandma had, which I don't know where it is now. But because you need so many, 6 to 8 of them, to stay hot because they will cool down as you're doing your ironing. At 6 a.m., breakfast was simple and practical. Think of it as the original meal prep. Oatmeal and eggs if they were lucky enough to have chickens, and they would probably have toast from yesterday's homemade bread. But even during breakfast, they were planning dinner based on what was in their pantry and in their root cellar. They would be shopping from their own preserved foods before shop from your pantry became a TikTok trend. And then at 8 a.m., this is when the real ironing marathon would begin. So if you can imagine, you had to iron every single piece of clothing that your family owns every single week. They would test the iron temperature by spitting on it, and if it sizzled and evaporated immediately, then it was ready to go. Now, I love that the original temperature gauge was literally spit and prayer. Here's where their system gets really smart, though. They'd sprinkle clothes the night before with water from a bottle with holes punched in the cap. Basically a DIY spray bottle that actually worked better than the ones that we have now. And because you know they're always failing, and you're like, why the heck is this thing not working? I don't understand. Then they would iron in a specific order. They'd start with their delicates first when the iron was coolest, then they'd do the shirts, then the heavy work clothes, and then the clothes that could handle the hottest temperatures. They were rotating irons like a short order cook flips burgers. As one would cool down, they would grab the next hot one from the stove. And they had tricks that still work today. So they would iron their shirts inside out to prevent shine, which I have done, although I hate ironing and hardly ever do it. They would use brown paper under the iron for delicate fabrics, and they would hang everything immediately to prevent wrinkling. That is such a hard word to say. I mean, I love the attention to detail though, and all of the genius that went into all of this. And what I love about it too is it's just been passed down from generation to generation to generation, which I think is really cool. My mom taught me how to iron, but I still hate ironing. Anyway, 12 p.m. Their main meal was at midday, not at evening, which I think is super smart. So why wouldn't you have your biggest meal when you actually need the energy instead of right before bed when you don't need your energy? They would cook from scratch using veg from their garden or preserve vegetables from their pantry, and home canned meat if they were lucky enough to have it, because again, money was very, very tight and meat was a luxury. So Wednesday is mending or turnout living areas day. So they had to make a decision. They're either mending or they're deep cleaning. Turning out is what that means. And I mean, they were always dusting after that darn dust bowl. So I'm sure even if they were mending, they were still going around and wiping stuff off. But it's kind of like choosing to do between your taxes and cleaning out your garage, both necessary and both slightly soul crushing. But on mending days, they would tackle repairs that would make a modern seamstress search for her thimbles. They could darn a sock so well, it was stronger than the original sock. And they had these things called darning eggs, which was like a wooden egg shaped tool to weave new threads through the holes, like putting stitches in a patient, but only this was much prettier than some of the interesting jobs that I have seen in the ER when I was an ER nurse. Anyway, the real genius was in their preventative mending. Okay, this is genius. They would reinforce stress points, knees, elbows, pockets before they were even worn through. Now, I could use this on my hoodies. I literally am so tempted to do that because I just wear through my elbows. I'm a real leaner. I lean a lot. Anyway, they were basically giving their clothes armor before sending them into battle. When their shirt collars wore out, they'd remove them, they'd take them off, flip them around, sew them right back on for double the wear. And now we're talking, because twice the life out of every piece of clothing that you own. Very smart. So on the turnout days, they would tackle the living areas with an intensity that would put modern cleaning services to shame. They wouldn't just clean the rooms. They destroyed dust bunny colonies. Their window cleaning technique is still the best method today. Vinegar and water in equal parts and old newspapers instead of paper towels. And they would always do it on cloudy days to prevent streaking. So your grandma was right about the newspaper thing. It really does not leave lint. And I am curious if anybody still uses newspapers for this. And also, where do you get newspapers now? I'm just curious. Anyway, for the rugs, they would take them outside and they would beat them with a carpet beater until that dust clouds looked like a small weather system. It was like anger management therapy with the benefit of clean rugs in the end. I could see how that would be really handy, especially during that time. Then they'd sprinkle damp tea leaves on the floors before sweeping, because the leaves would collect the dust, it would grab the dust, and it was added freshness. Basically the original Swiffer, except it smelled like Earl Grey tea. Mwah! That sounds pretty darn nice to me. Now Thursday was bedroom day, which meant dealing with mattresses that would give modern chiropractors nightmares. These were not your memory foam, pillow top, sleep number mattresses. And they probably still slept so hard they didn't care what their mattress was like because they were working so hard. They had to turn these heavy straw or horsehair mattresses monthly, which was like wrestling with a very uncooperative giant pillow filled with jello. Plus, here's the brilliant part. They'd air their mattresses outside on sunny days to kill dust mites and freshen them up naturally. UV sanitization before we even knew what UV sanitization was. Also, seasonal clothing storage was an art form. Think of it as the original capsule wardrobe, except it was driven by necessity and not minimalism blogs. They'd pack winter clothes in cedar chests with lavender or cedar blocks for moths, and they'd wrap everything in newspaper. The ink helped repel the insects. And they would also put bars of soap in there as well for freshness. Can you imagine how lovely and fresh it smelled in there? The deep cleaning was thorough in ways that we can't even imagine. When was the last time that you dusted with damp cloths instead of just moving dust around with a duster? I like the Swiffer, but I do know that dry dusting is a problem because it relocates things, and that's what my mom taught me. So everything got wiped down with slightly damp cloths. So Friday was baking day, which sounds cozy until you realize that they were baking enough bread to feed a family for a week. So it was like running a small bakery, except for their only customers were the people who lived in their house, which I know that their families had favorites. Don't you love fresh bread with butter? I bet that was one of their favorites. Anyway, so the bread making process started with sourdough starter that families kept alive for years, sometimes decades. I think my own starter is about 2 years old. Anyway, these starters were like family pets that you fed and you cared for them, except for they actually contributed to dinner. And they'd mix the dough the night before for better flavor and also healthier. And then they would knead it by hand for 15 to 20 minutes. So here's me with my KitchenAid mixer, feeling a little bit embarrassed here. Who needs a gym membership when you're kneading dough to feed 6 people? Now, Friday wasn't just about bread though. It was also like a meal prep Sunday, except for it happened every single week, including preserving for winter. They would can vegetables using methods that are still considered the gold standard today, and some that aren't. So do some research. They would dry herbs by hanging them in bundles, and they would make sauerkraut in large crocks for winter vitamin C. They were fermenting vegetables before kombucha was cool, and I make my own kombucha when I remember to feed it. Okay, moving on. And their root cellar management was incredibly sophisticated. Imagine a pantry so well organized that you could feed your family for months without shopping. Dreams! This is mine. I love it so much, but I still can't stay away from Costco. They'd also store their potatoes in sand to prevent sprouting. They'd hang onions in braids for air circulation, and they'd wrap apples individually in newspaper. Each little apple got its own little newspaper blankie. Saturday was the day they tackled the heart of the home, the kitchen, with an intensity that would make professional cleaners take notes. They did not just deep clean their stoves. They performed a full surgical procedure. They just took them right apart. Cast iron wood stoves and coal stoves required complete disassembly for proper cleaning. Can you imagine if you had to take apart your entire oven every single week just to clean it properly? They'd remove all of the burner plates and drip pans. They'd scrub everything with wood ash mixed with water because that's a really good abrasive cleaner. If you've never tried it, give it a go if it's something that you don't want to end up getting soot water everywhere. Anyway, then they would polish it with stove black, which was like this beautiful paste that prevented rust and it gave shine. Their stoves were probably cleaner than most modern operating rooms. For sinks and counters, they used techniques that still work better than modern methods. Baking soda and salt for stubborn stains, lemon halves as scrubbers. Your great-grandma's cleaning arsenal was basically the natural products aisle at Whole Foods, but only better and cheaper. They'd rinse everything with boiling water to sanitize it, and then they would dry it immediately to prevent water stains and rust. They often left things in the sun to sanitize as well. Their floor cleaner technique was simple but effective. They would sweep with corn brooms to get everything, they'd get into like every corner, and then they would mop with hot soapy water made from their homemade lye soap, their bacon soap. And then they would rinse it with clean water to remove that soap residue. And then they would dry it with old towels. No fancy steam mops or robot vacuums, just elbow grease and a system that worked really, really well. Now, Sunday was supposed to be a day of rest. Though rest was relative when you still had to cook Sunday dinner for the family, but I still imagine it was still a restful day. I actually like doing that kind of meal, but I know a lot of people don't like cooking, so I get it. Sundays were also crucial for planning the week ahead. Do you do this? Because I do this. Even the women in my membership, we meet monthly to plan our lives out. These ladies, they would inventory their pantry and their root cellar, which I still do, but I keep it on my phone. But They would check what is ready to harvest in the garden, and they would prepare clothes for Monday's wash. I think Sunday meal planning probably at some point got to less of what sounds good and more of like, what do we have that won't make us sick? Now, the monthly tasks, they rotated like clockwork. Imagine having a cleaning schedule so organized that you never had to think about what needed to be done. You just knew it. One month they'd wash all of the windows using vinegar water and newspapers. The next month they'd deep clean one room completely by moving all the furniture and washing all the walls. But I found this really interesting picture, drawing, infographic, I don't know. And it just sort of shows like the beautiful rhythm that they would work kind of like going through the year. For spring, you know, like starting chicks, things like that. It would go all the way to winter where, you know, like then they're just sewing and whatnot because they don't have to worry about gardening as much. So anyway, spring cleaning today, it's kind of like organizing your junk drawer. But in the 1930s, they were prepping for a military inspection. They had to get everything ready. This was no time to mess around. They were prepping for their garden and their food. They'd wash all of their winter bedding and they would just pack it all away with moth deterrents. They beat their rugs outside for hours. Can you imagine? Until no dust remained. They'd wash their walls and their ceilings with homemade cleaners. When was the last time you washed your ceiling? I don't think I ever have. I do sometimes Swiffer it though. I probably could do that again. Anyway, they did it twice a year, partially because there was still a lot of heating or cooking with wood or coal though. Now, fall cleaning, it was all about winter preparation, like winterizing your car, except that they were winterizing their entire lives. They'd seal windows with strips of cloth to prevent drafts. Then they'd check and repair their heating systems, and they'd do a final major push to preserve their food. They were basically preparing for a zombie apocalypse, except for the zombies were winter and poverty. Here's what strikes me most about the Depression era homemaking. These women had incredible resilience and energy, despite having so much less than we do. I have had many patients who their lives were so busy and chaotic, they were just overwhelmed and their energy was drained and they got sick. But these women, they actually created systems that supported their energy instead of depleting it. It was like a routine that just sort of kept going and it felt natural. They also had fun in all of this. They did. They took time out to spend time with family. They would do free things. They would do swimming, you know, things like that. But they knew that daily maintenance prevented bigger problems, both in their homes and their health. It's like the difference between brushing your teeth daily versus waiting for a root canal. We've lost that wisdom in our modern weekend warrior approach to cleaning. We try to do everything at once. We burn ourselves out, and then we wonder why our homes quickly fall apart. There's something so special about this timeless wisdom. I actually made a video here about grandma's cleaning routines and how we have forgotten so many, but a lot that we still do. The habits that I share in this video will change how you think about maintaining your home forever, and you can watch that right here. I hope something great happens for you today. Please like and subscribe. Stay chatty and mighty. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!